Hello, welcome to Hot Topic. This week I'm with Dr. Ian Kelly, the Chief Executive of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. Ian, thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
You are 180 years old. You're looking well on it.
Well, I'm, in Doctor Who terms, number 11 of the chief executives of the Chamber over those 180 years.
You're the 11th Avatar.
Absolutely. And of course they keep getting younger. You know, in those olden pictures of 180 years ago, they look very old. Of course, I'm evergreen, as you know.
Clearly you are. But 180 years, how's it going so far?
Well, that is one of the good things of Chambers of Commerce. We all were established around the Industrial Revolution. In our case, 1837, the year Victoria ascended the throne. And from that point of view, we like to play the long game, which is what we've shown that we can do.
Well, I won't ask you what you think things are going to be like in 180 years' time.
Did you know my predecessor
Yes.
included Mr. Smith and Smith and Nephew fame? So we have some interesting characters who've done my job, although there was a chap called Mr. Prescott, but he only lasted a year. That was about 100 years ago.
Right, very well. I thought you were going to say Smith and Wesson there for a moment.
Well, you know.
Let's get back to the slightly more recent history. There was a budget a couple of weeks ago, and it's not clear which bits of that budget are actually going to make it into the finance bill. It's a bit of an omnishambles, to use the usual budget adjective. Let's talk, first of all, in some detail, business rates. How's that going to affect your members?
Well, I think sort of the experts locally have pointed out that most of the businesses in this part of the world will benefit. It's our brethren down in London and the South East who have been worst affected. And so I think on this occasion we should be kind and be okay about the worst of the rough edges on business rates being knocked off at their end. And indeed, we got our own business rates at the Chamber the other day, and we're better off too.
But that is that people who benefit are only going to be the people with quite small or low value premises, as it were. The big industries, big companies, they are going to be paying more. And I asked this remembering that one of the reasons that Tata Steel couldn't make it in Scunthorpe was because the local taxation, the business rates, were one of their major costs, along with energy.
Well, we do know that rates are, within themselves, they do have issues. For example, for retailers, you have this issue of digital shopping these days, which does mean that you're at a disadvantage if you're on the high street paying those sort of business rates on big property assets. And as you quite rightly say, big sites like British Steel do have issues in terms of the nature of the business rate take that we have here in the UK compared to many of their competitors, such as in Germany.
But those big rates, if British Steel has problems, then will that also be problems for renewable energy companies?
Well, it's slightly different if you're offshore, I suppose.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but there are large depots, there are large bases on shore.
Well, in Siemens' case, for example, that's part of the enterprise zone, which means that your business rates are part of the deal that you don't have to pay, or at much reduced rates as part of an enterprise zone area. That's where, in terms of the geography of the enterprise zones, the Chamber was central to that when we created the LEP. It covered Alexandra Dock, which covers Siemens, which has helped them along their way.
What about one of the other measures, the raise in national insurance payments for self-employed? Now, that's clearly not going to happen now. That was, let's put it politely, that was an error. But there is going to be some requirement to raise taxation one way or another, or to borrow from the government debt, the government deficit. There's only two ways that money can come in. So that it really wasn't such a bad policy, was it, the raise in national insurance?
Well, I met Philip Hammond when he came here as a junior minister and did a lot for getting us the reduction on the bridge tolls, actually. He was the first one that took that seriously.
Well, he's not all bad then. But
he's not all bad or business unfriendly. Where you are correct in saying it was bad was in terms of the politics, because on his own side he didn't have enough support, and apparently, obviously it contradicted part of the manifesto. The problem was, and most of the white rabbits out of the hat were done by his predecessor. There was little room for manoeuvre with his £170 billion deficit. He's trying to put a little bit aside for Brexit that may have some requirement for a little bit down the back of the sofa. And there is a genuine issue about, NICs and the balance between that and national insurance contributions for the self-employed compared to those who are employees, as increasingly more people move to what we call the gig economy or zero contracts,
hours,
and which
contracts.
is does mean that is having a big impact. I think it's about between £3 and £5 billion that's now eroding the traditional tax base as more people go on to self-employed and less are contractually employed as staff.
Well, and just within your membership in the Chamber of Commerce, what sort of proportion of your members would you say come under that heading, as it were, of self-employed or running very small businesses?
No, you've got me there. We haven't done any tests or surveys on that, but there is clearly an evidential move from a lot of particularly mature people to do in business consultancy type work, so they can flexibly meet their needs as their age and move towards retirement emerges. And then, of course, you also have it with the self-employed in the construction industry, the lump, and many smaller painters, decorators who operate at that sort of level as well, window cleaners. So it is a growing phenomena, and that will affect my membership as well as most businesses.
Another cost onto especially small and medium-sized enterprises might be the increase in probate charges.
Yeah.
It is effectively an increase in inheritance tax, isn't it? Now, a lot of family businesses, as they move through the generations, a lot of businesses end with the words "and sons," increasingly "and daughters."
Yeah.
Is that no longer going to be affordable? Is it effectively, this is a move to stop wealth or enterprise moving through generations?
Well, it's certainly going to have a big impact if you've got a big inheritance, and really it is just a tax-raising measure because the coffers are empty, as it were, and I suspect there'll be a lot of accountants working hard with those businesses to ensure that that probate cost is reduced as much as is possible.
Now, you inevitably, as running a Chamber of Commerce, will be arguing against tax rises on businesses. And yet you are an economist, and you know that there is, as you mentioned, the £17 billion deficit. Now, that deficit is effectively a way of taxing people, taking that money and giving it to the owners of the gilts, the treasury bonds, so that they can spend it on their yachts in the Mediterranean and the gnomes of Zurich. So I would imagine that you, as an economist, would argue that a raise in business taxes to pay down the deficit so that taxpayers pay less in interest rates to subsidise gilt-owning millionaires, that you would be arguing for a tax rise.
Well, there are judgments to be made. I think we'd all accept that with the national debt now 170 billion, generating 50 millions worth of debt servicing costs.
We're paying the same on the interest in that debt as we pay for the defence budget.
Yes, it's a big figure. So any chancellor is going to have to combine, to be honest, tax increases from somewhere to manage that, or generate phenomenal rates of growth, which usually come with tax reductions. It's a balancing act, and that's interestingly what Trump's trying to do. He's trying to say that by reducing tax we'll get growth up, and it's a very interesting mix if you're the Chancellor.
So there is the possibility then, and I don't wish to associate either you or me with President Trump in any way whatsoever, but there is a possibility then, but by lowering taxes, growth increases sufficiently that in fact the government's revenue increases. It charges lower taxes, but more people are paying them because of the economic growth, and the money goes up.
Well, you know as well as I do that as an economist for every different day of the week, with a different view as to how to generate best growth.
Yes,
and
but you're an old-fashioned Keynesian, aren't you? I know you evolved.
Well, I wouldn't say that, actually. I'm very concerned about the level of the national debt, and do believe that we do need to balance the books sooner rather than later.
I mentioned Keynes. One of the great sort of Keynesian doctrines for economics is to spend on infrastructure, priming the pump, as Franklin Roosevelt put it back in the 30s with the New Deal. And that subject is what we're going to have to talk about in the second half here.
Right.
Join me in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still with Ian Kelly, Chief Executive of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. Ian, we were just about to start talking about infrastructure. One of the numbers that came out of the budget was a £90 million extra investment in the so-called Northern Powerhouse. 90 million quid, frankly, that's not the price of a round of drinks. It's not a lot.
Well, it's not. And one of the points I made on budget day to your colleagues over on another channel was 90 million, frankly, for the Northern Powerhouse will not put much of the power into the Northern Powerhouse.
Where's it going to be spent?
Well, my guess is, like virtually all the other cash, it'll be spent on the other side of the Pennines. We have some real problems, as the National Audit Office pointed out recently, in terms of overspend on the West Coast Main Line. So that's absorbing huge amounts of Department of Transport cash. And then on top of that, the planned cash for the Pennine area, what's known as Transport for the North across the Northern Powerhouse, virtually all that money is going on the west side, some over to Leeds, but very little, if anything, to be honest, here in the Humber.
If there were an unlimited pot of money, what further infrastructure do we need here on the Humber?
Well, first of all, there's some port issues in terms of gauge improvements, both here on the South Bank and on the North Bank.
Gauge on the railways serving the ports.
On the railways, it can take you, if you want to freight through from Immingham over to Liverpool, nearly 4.5 hours going via Birmingham to get, goods across the Pennines. It's ridiculous.
Well, if it's going that distance and that time via Birmingham, then it's going a great deal faster than the Trans-Pennine Express, which takes, 2.5, 3 hours to get from Cleethorpes to Manchester Airport.
Well, indeed, the one victory I will give to our friend Martin Vickers is that he did get a single line into the airport.
He's the Member of Parliament for Cleethorpes.
Indeed, he did very well there, Martin. But he wasn't so successful in leading our collective campaign to get a direct train link into London, where the Transport Secretary said it'd be 16 years before that would come. And in reality, that's crackers when you think of the benefits to the Hull economy that we got when we got Hull trains, which I and Alan Johnson and Hull City Council were very closely involved with.
Well, maybe if it's going to benefit the Hull and Humber economy, it's the Hull and Humber economy that should be paying for such a railway line rather than people who are never going to use it.
Well, my golly me, we do pay our taxes, and we have some very big businesses who pay a lot of taxes, and so we're entitled to certainly a bigger fraction of the transport spend that we get. We are the worst place in the country in terms of transport spend, and now our friends in London, who have got 15 billion being spent on Crossrail, are now lobbying the Chancellor for Crossrail too. We can't even get a decent direct rail link from Cleethorpes into London, even though Virgin goes up to Liverpool, Lincoln.
Now, we have recent figures suggest that our region, Yorkshire and the Humber anyway, so the northern part of our region, has some of the lowest unemployment in the country. Now, is this because all the Yorkshiremen and women have taken Norman Tebbett's advice and gone on their bikes and just left and gone elsewhere to find work? Or is it because there is that growth that we were talking about previously, that there is a happy growth in the Yorkshire economy?
Well, I'm delighted that the statistics that the Chancellor was happy to highlight about Yorkshire and the Humber are going in the right direction. We do have some good activity at the moment. Hull, for example, as we know, has got on a bit of a roll, £1 billion investment in the city. Siemens creating 1,000 jobs, Reckitt Benckiser's 100 million investment, etc. So there is some good news there, although there are, as we know, in both Hull and Grimsby and Scunthorpe, although that's good to see British Steel coming back, pockets of unemployment which are frightening and hard to deal with.
But in the generality, as it were, which is good news, if unemployment is very low, which means that there is a smaller supply of labour, that laws of supply and demand would suggest that the price of labour will go up. And our wages going up?
Well, interestingly, we had the agent of the Bank of England at a chamber event yesterday, and the bank is monitoring very carefully, particularly now inflation's gone up and over the 2% threshold, whether there will be any kick in of wage inflation. Although, as we talked about earlier, more flexibility in the labour market, the gig economy, which does hollow out the wealth of many families in the home, does actually reduce the likelihood of that traditional wage inflation model.
You mentioned interest rates there, which I did want to come on to, and inflation. Sorry, you mentioned inflation. I want to come on to interest rates. Inflation is now over 2%. Interest rates again set by the Bank of England just a little at the end of last month at only 0.25%, 0.25%. Now, if inflation is so much higher than interest rates, there's absolutely no point in keeping cash, in keeping money, because its value lowers. So does that mean that people are injecting money, investing in industry, investing in enterprise more than they have been in recent times?
Well, investment in businesses is most impacted by confidence. Although access to cash, particularly for smaller firms, remains an issue. And I think what we've had is political turbulence, both over things like Brexit, which happen chance didn't affect the economy much at all in reality. And
well, it hasn't started yet, Ian.
Well, in terms of precisely that point, there were fears being ramped up by some of the politicians, particularly those against Brexit, that it would be the end of the world, and that's what lost the previous Chancellor's job. That project fear was actually quite destabilising. So confidence is fairly good at the moment, and that is starting to result in greater investment.
Just one more thing on the jobs. We have Dong and Siemens. It's very difficult to talk about the economy of this area without mentioning those two companies, and I think you brought them up first. Who's getting those jobs in the renewable energy sector? Is it local people, or is it foreigners coming in, or people from other parts of the country coming in who already have the necessary skills and don't need training in these parts? Who's getting this large number of jobs that are coming here, but are the people who are from here getting those jobs?
Well, I've been a party to some of the robust discussions that have gone on about the need for local people to get many of those jobs, and for the supply chain to come here or develop here. And in that regard, Siemens can quite happily, quite rightly, say 1,000 jobs coming to Hull, and indeed Jürgen Meyer, the boss in the UK, has talked about a much higher figure as they go even further. Dong, Brent Cheshire's people would, I suggest, say to you, well, our job isn't actually big job creation. We actually own the fields, and we subcontract to the likes of Siemens to build those blades or turbines, the towers or others.
And to service them as well, presumably.
And it did, which is happening through Grimsby a great deal, as we know, and we're getting all those reports and seeing all that activity here in Grimsby, which is being done by a lot of local people, although obviously some skills are coming in from Germany and Denmark.
Talking of Germany and Denmark, we can't go much further without talking about Brexit. Let me just one practical problem for local businesses that export from Yorkshire and Humber and from Hull. Rather than having to go through one piece of paperwork to export to 27 countries, other countries in the EU, now you have to have 27, or we will in 2 years' time, when we come out, have 27 different bits of bureaucracy to go through. Some of those countries requiring bribery as well, further east you go and south. Will that not itself, A, be an enormous cost, or B, if we want to find a silver lining, employ an enormous number of other people in export paperwork departments?
Well, an export paperwork department, that sounds a bit like Yes Minister, if you ask me. But
well, they exist here. Both know it.
Sort of from the point of view, there's a very big debate, as you know, around Brexit, and there's the issues around the costs to Britain and British businesses and British business taxpayers of Europe and the associated regulations that come in there, which may or may not be applicable. Fisheries for the UK, and here in Grimsby, Grimsby and Hull is one area which is well known. But you're right as well. If we do leave the European Union, there will be additional transaction activity, no doubt.
Additional transaction activity. And you say I sound like yes,
Well,
Minister.
we do it with the rest of the world. You have Europe, which is a relatively reducing size of our global trading marketplace.
It's still half
and
of
for the
it.
rest of the world, most of the export departments that you see are fairly sophisticated, working with bodies like ours, if I may say, at the Chamber, where we have processes for going to nearly 200 countries across the world. Yes, there will be more costs, but then again, actually exports, since the devaluation of the pound, would way compensate where we've had 20% devaluation, and there will be, if WTO rules applied, a 3% increase in terms of tariffs. That's 17% better. I'm not saying it will be ideal if we do
had
Brexit,
an opportunity
but it
to
won't
discuss
be as
further
bad
the
as some
consequences
say.
of that devaluation of the pound, Ian, but that'll have to wait for next time. Thank you so much, as ever, for coming in. Join me again next week for another hot topic.